For decades, we've heard leaders talk about a new Cold War as some distant, hypothetical threat, a problem for another generation. Well, they were wrong. The new Cold War isn't coming. It's already here. And its opening shot wasn't a missile or a cyber attack. It was a quiet diplomatic move in one of the most remote, desolate, and strategically vital places on Earth. On February 6, 2026, the Canadian flag was raised over a new office in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a simple administrative act. But in reality, it was a direct and unmistakable warning shot, fired right across the bow of the United States. A calculated challenge aimed at one man's relentless ambition: Donald Trump. This isn't just about a building. This is the story of how a small consulate became the new front line in a global struggle for power, for resources, and for the future of the planet itself. This is how Canada is drawing a line in the ice and directly challenging an American president's dream of Arctic dominance. So why does raising a flag in Nuuk matter so much? To get that, you first have to understand why the world is suddenly obsessed with a landmass that is 80% ice. For centuries, the Arctic was an afterthought, a frozen wasteland at the top of the world, interesting to explorers and scientists, but pretty irrelevant to the great powers. That era is over. Climate change has turned the Arctic from a polar desert into what might be the single most valuable piece of real estate on the planet. As the ice melts at a terrifying rate, two things are being revealed: unimaginable wealth and an unparalleled strategic advantage. First, the wealth. Greenland isn't just ice. Buried beneath that frozen sheet lies a treasure trove of the world's most sought-after resources. We're talking vast, untapped reserves of oil and natural gas. But more importantly, Greenland is believed to hold one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals outside of China. These aren't just obscure elements you memorized for a high school chemistry test. Rare earths are the lifeblood of our modern economy. They're in your smartphone, your computer, and the fiber optics that carry this video. They're essential for green tech, from wind turbines to EV batteries. And critically, they are indispensable for advanced military hardware. F-35 fighter jets, precision-guided missiles, and sophisticated radar systems all depend on a steady supply. For decades, China has held a near monopoly on this market, a strategic vulnerability that keeps Western military planners up at night. Greenland offers a chance to break that dependency. Whoever controls Greenland's minerals has a powerful hand on the switch of the global economy and modern warfare. Second, the strategic geography. The melting ice is opening up new sea lanes that are set to rewire global trade. The legendary Northwest Passage through Canada and Russia's Northern Sea Route are becoming real seasonal shipping lanes. These routes can cut the travel time between Asia and Europe by up to 40%, saving billions of dollars and bypassing choke points like the Suez Canal. For the military, the implications are even more profound. The Arctic is the shortest flight path for missiles between Russia and North America. It is the ceiling of the world, a new high ground for military domination. For the U.S., an expanded footprint in Greenland is seen as essential for deploying what some in the Pentagon call the Golden Dome, a next-gen missile defense shield. Geographically, Greenland is the cork in the bottle of the North Atlantic, controlling access to the ocean for Russia's powerful northern fleet. So that's the problem. A region of immense, game-changing value is opening up for the first time in human history. The old rules are melting away with the ice, creating a power vacuum. And into that vacuum has stepped a leader who sees the world not in terms of alliances, but as a series of deals to be made and assets to be acquired. Donald Trump's interest in Greenland isn't new, and it's definitely not subtle. It first exploded onto the world stage back in 2019, when he casually floated the idea of buying the island from Denmark. The proposal was met with disbelief and, frankly, ridicule. The Danish Prime Minister called it absurd. Greenland's government shot back, "We are open for business, but we are not for sale." At the time, the story was treated as just another bizarre whim. But it was never a whim. It was a clear statement of intent. And in 2026, with Trump back in the White House, the Greenland obsession has returned with a vengeance, this time backed by threats and a much more urgent geopolitical calculus. This new push is fueled by intelligence reports warning of increased Russian and Chinese activity in the high north. Russian nuclear subs are prowling the deep, cold waters. Chinese research vessels, widely seen as dual-purpose ships, are mapping the seabed. Russia, with its massive Arctic coastline, is actively militarizing its northern sea route, building new bases and deploying advanced missile systems. From the White House's perspective, the United States was falling behind. With only a small strip of Arctic coastline in Alaska, its strategic position felt weak. Greenland, massive and perfectly placed, was the obvious answer, and its protector, Denmark, was seen as a weak link. In the blunt language of the administration, Denmark was a tiny country, incapable of defending Greenland from Russian or Chinese ambitions. This wasn't just talk, it was a justification for action. If Denmark wouldn't sell, Trump would force a deal. The weapon of choice? Economic warfare. In early 2026, the White House began threatening crippling tariffs on Denmark and 7 other European nations. The plan was simple and brutal: a 10% tariff on all goods, escalating to 25% if they refused to negotiate a new security framework for Greenland, a framework that would give the U.S. effective control, if not outright ownership. The threat sent shockwaves through NATO. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostage situation. It was pure Trump. Use economic leverage to get a geopolitical goal, and forget the diplomatic niceties. He even trolled Canada, a key Arctic nation, by posting a doctored map on social media that showed much of Canada's north absorbed into a greater American Arctic. It was played off as a joke, but it revealed the mindset. In this new Cold War, old friendships are a distant second to strategic gain. The immediate crisis was only averted after a tense emergency meeting at NATO headquarters. The alliance's Secretary General, Mark Rutte, managed to broker a temporary pause. Trump agreed to hold off on the tariffs, vaguely referencing a new framework for Arctic security, though no one released any specifics. But no one believed the issue was resolved. The threat was still on the table. Trump had made his position clear. He would get control over Greenland one way or another. He saw an asset he wanted, and he was determined to get it. What he didn't count on was America's closest ally making a bold and decisive counter-move. So how do you counter a superpower's aggressive posturing without firing a single shot? How does a middle power like Canada push back against the raw ambition of a Trump administration? The answer came on February 6, 2026, and it was a masterclass in 21st century statecraft. Canada didn't send a warship. It sent a diplomat. It didn't issue a threat. It hosted a ceremony. The opening of the Canadian consulate in Nuuk was an event years in the making, first announced back in 2024 and delayed from late 2025 by the harsh Arctic weather. But its timing, coming right after Trump's tariff threats, transformed it from a routine diplomatic opening into a profound political statement. The scene in Nuuk was thick with symbolism. As the maple leaf flag was raised, it was clear this was no ordinary event. The Canadian delegation was deliberately high-level, led by Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. She posted a video to X declaring the move was about strengthening Canada's presence, partnerships, and leadership in the Arctic. The language was diplomatic, but the subtext was steel. Even more potent was the presence of Governor-General Mary Simon. In Canada's system, the Governor-General is the monarch's representative, a mostly ceremonial role. But Mary Simon is no ordinary Governor-General. She is an Inuk, born and raised in northern Quebec, and the first Indigenous person to ever hold the position. Her presence in Nuuk was a message in itself, transcending the politics of Ottawa and Washington. It was a statement of Indigenous solidarity, a powerful reminder that the Arctic is not an empty chessboard for superpowers. It is a homeland. When the Greenlandic people saw Mary Simon, they didn't just see a representative of the Canadian state. They saw one of their own, a respected elder who has spent her life advocating for Inuit rights. She got a hero's welcome with over 90 members of Canada's Inuit diaspora reportedly flying in for the occasion, a visible bridge between the two peoples. During her visit, Simon met with Greenlandic leaders and representatives from the Inuit Circumpolar Conference. Her message was a direct rebuttal to Trump's transactional approach. She made it clear that Canada stands firmly in support of the people of Greenland, who will determine their own future. The choice of words was meticulous. This wasn't about Canada's future or America's. It was about Greenland's future, decided by its own people. The symbolism was everywhere. The Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker, the CCGS Jean Goodwill, was anchored in Nuuk's harbor, a tangible piece of Canadian presence. Natan Obed, the influential president of Canada's National Inuit Organization, was also there, speaking of the consulate as a bridge for cooperation. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his Greenlandic counterparts, declaring that Inuit would stand together with the people of Greenland and Denmark on defense and security. Every element was carefully choreographed: the diplomacy, the cultural connection, the visible assertion of presence. Canada was showing the world that its claim to Arctic leadership wasn't just based on geography, but on a deep, respectful relationship with its partners and, most importantly, with the indigenous peoples of the region. It was a direct contrast to Trump's approach of threats and purchase offers. Canada was showing another way to wield power in the Arctic, not through coercion, but through cooperation. Canada wasn't acting alone. The flag raising in Nuuk was the most visible move, but it was part of a broader, quieter consolidation of allies who were just as alarmed by the White House's posture. As Canada opened its consulate, another major Western power was making its own move. Almost simultaneously, France announced that its first consul to Greenland, a seasoned diplomat named Jean-Noël Poirier, was arriving in Nuuk. While a physical French consulate was still pending, the message was unmistakable. A second G7 nation was planting its flag, metaphorically, right alongside Canada's. The French government echoed Canada's support for Denmark's territorial integrity, creating a united front. This wasn't just Canada taking a stand. It was the start of a coordinated pushback. This placed Denmark in an incredibly tough spot. On one hand, the U.S. is its most important security guarantor through NATO. On the other, the U.S. president was actively trying to force it to surrender part of its kingdom. The Danish government has been walking a tightrope, publicly insisting that Greenland's sovereignty is non-negotiable. Still, Denmark has also tried to appease Washington, recently approving an expanded American military presence at its bases in Greenland. It's the difficult balancing act of a smaller nation caught between a demanding ally and its own constitutional obligations. Greenland's 2009 Act on Self-Government gives it authority over its own resources and a path to full independence. Denmark literally cannot sell Greenland. The decision rests with the 57,000 people who live there, a fact consistently ignored by the White House, but placed at the very center of the Canadian and French response. These moves have effectively internationalized the dispute. It's no longer just between Washington and Copenhagen. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former governor of the Bank of England with deep European ties, has been working the diplomatic channels hard. He has repeatedly affirmed that Canada will always support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Denmark, including Greenland. More broadly, he has framed this as a test of the international order, rallying Nordic and Baltic allies who see the instability as a direct threat. The message is clear. The Arctic's future must be decided by international law, not strong-arm tactics. So why should this matter to the rest of us? Because what's happening in Greenland is a preview of the global power shifts that will define the 21st century. First, this is a crucial test for the future of the Western alliance. It pits two fundamentally different models of power against each other. On one side is the America First doctrine, a belief that might makes right, alliances are conditional, and national sovereignty is negotiable if it gets in the way of American interests. On the other side is the model being advanced by Canada and its European allies, one based on international law, multilateralism, and self-determination. By emphasizing partnership with Greenlanders, Canada is arguing that a nation's strength comes not just from its size, but from the legitimacy of its actions and its alliances. If this diplomatic counterplay succeeds, it will prove that middle powers, acting together, can still uphold a rules-based order. If it fails, it will signal a new era of raw, unchecked power politics is truly here. Second, this is a fight for the future economy. Control over Greenland's rare earth minerals means control over the supply chains for everything from green energy to advanced weaponry. This isn't just about wealth, it's about national security. By working to partner with Greenland, Canada, and its allies are trying to create a secure, stable, and democratic source for these vital minerals, breaking China's monopoly and preventing an American one from forming. Finally, and maybe most importantly, this is about indigenous sovereignty. For centuries, the Arctic has been colonized by Southerners who saw it as empty land to be exploited. This drama challenges that colonial mindset head-on. The central role of Inuit leaders like Mary Simon and the vocal opposition from Greenlanders represents a historic shift. They are asserting their right, as the original inhabitants, to be the primary authors of the Arctic's future. Canada's strategy recognizes this. The U.S. strategy of trying to buy the island completely ignores it. This is why Canada is backing its diplomatic play with concrete military investments. Prime Minister Mark Carney has pushed for increased defense spending through NATO, specifically for the Arctic. This includes funding for new radar systems to monitor air and sea approaches, as well as new submarines and patrol aircraft. Canada is sending a clear message. Our commitment to a stable, rules-based Arctic isn't just talk. The consulate in Nuuk is the velvet glove, but underneath, there is an iron fist. In Washington and Ottawa, the Arctic is a map of resources and strategic choke points. But for the people who live there, it is home, and their voices, so often ignored, are becoming impossible to dismiss. The opening of the Canadian consulate was a deeply personal and emotional event for many Inuit. The sight of Mary Simon, one of their own, being welcomed as a stateswoman was a powerful symbol of pride. Online, social media celebrated the consulate as a bridge between families and communities divided by a colonial border. It felt like the fulfillment of a promise to put Inuit at the heart of Arctic policy. But alongside this, hope is a deep and growing anxiety. The aggressive rhetoric from the U.S. has stoked real fear. In Iqaluit, the capital of Canada's Nunavut territory, a lawyer born in Greenland described the American bids to buy the island as disrespectful and offensive. But his worry went deeper. He, like many Northerners, fears that American ambition won't stop at Greenland. If the U.S. is not held in check, he worried, its flexing of muscles could spill over to our side of the water. This fear is real. When your superpower neighbor starts talking about Arctic territory as real estate and floats maps that absorb your land, it feels less like a political game and more like a direct threat to your home. In Greenland itself, protests have erupted against the American overtures. The idea of being bought is seen as a profound insult to their identity and their long struggle for self-governance. The Inuit Circumpolar Conference has made it clear. Any discussion about the region's future must be centered on indigenous rights. This is the human dimension of the new Cold War, the story of communities determined not to become pawns in someone else's game. By aligning with this principle, Canada has gained a kind of legitimacy that no amount of economic pressure can buy. This battle for the Arctic is far from over. It's a complex chess game, with new moves being made every month. The stakes, resources, security, and the international order could not be higher. If you want to understand the hidden forces shaping our world and stay ahead of the headlines on this escalating conflict, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. We break down the complex geopolitical stories that others miss. And let us know what you think in the comments. Is Canada's play in Greenland a brilliant strategic move? Or is it a noble but ultimately futile gesture? We read all of your comments. That small Canadian consulate in Nuuk, Greenland, is so much more than a building. It's a symbol, it's a statement, and it's a strategic beachhead in a new kind of global conflict. It represents a fundamental choice about the kind of world we're going to live in. Will it be a world governed by raw power, where sovereignty is conditional and territory is just an asset on a balance sheet? Or will it be a world where international law, diplomacy, and the right of people to determine their own future still matter? Canada, alongside its allies and the people of the Arctic, has made its choice. The flag raised in Nuuk may have been Canadian, but the message it sent was global. Some things are not for sale. The new Cold War is here, and it's being fought not with tanks across the fields of Europe, but with flags, treaties, and economic pressure in the frozen, thawing north. And as the ice continues to melt, the question is no longer if this conflict will escalate, but when and who will be left standing when the great Arctic thaw is complete.